Hey there, fellow philosopher. Ready to jump into a world where signs were way more than just simple symbols, like they were actual keys to unlock the mysteries of, well, meaning itself.
We're talking the fascinating realm of medieval semiotics.
Medieval semiotics. I bet some folks out there are thinking, hold on, wasn't semiotics like invented way later?
That's a common assumption for sure, but trust me, this deep dive, it's going to completely turn that idea on its head.
Awesome. I am so ready.
We are going to uncover how medieval thinkers, grappling with some of the biggest philosophical questions, like revolutionized the way we understand signs and their power.
I feel like the word power is key there. So let's get into it. What's so different about how people in the Middle Ages thought about signs, especially compared to how, we tend to think about them today?
Well, what's so captivating about medieval semiotics is that it's not this single unified theory, It's more like a vibrant tapestry woven across all these different disciplines, logic, theology, even medicine.
That's a great image. I can picture these scholars poring over ancient texts, adding their own thoughts and commentaries, each one pushing them deeper into this labyrinth of signification.
Exactly.
It's like they're peeling back layers of meaning, like those intricate Russian nesting dolls. But for a philosopher like you, this is where things get truly exciting. I mean, these medieval thinkers were wrestling with huge questions about how we know anything at all.
Absolutely.
What is a sign, even? And how does it bridge that gap between our minds and the world out there? Like, how does something become meaningful?
Exactly. And their inquiries went beyond simply like rehashing ancient ideas, They were forging new paths, creating this dynamic interplay between the wisdom of figures like Aristotle and Augustine and their own, brilliant insights.
Love it. Okay, so where do we even begin with all this?
To really appreciate this intellectual revolution, I think we need to start with the groundwork laid by two pivotal figures in the late ancient world, Augustine and Boethius.
Perfect. So let's travel back in time to that era. What can you tell me about how these thinkers sort of set the stage for the big medieval semiotic drama to unfold?
Okay, Augustine, our 4th century philosopher and theologian, he was such a trailblazer. He wasn't just content with analyzing words.
Right.
He had this vision of a concept of sign that encompassed everything. From the smoke that, indicates a fire to the subtle gestures of a monk.
Oh, wow.
He wanted a theory that could explain how we make sense of the entire world through this, vast network of signs.
But he was painting a much broader picture of signification, going beyond just language.
Precisely. He gave us the classic definition of a sign.
Oh, really? Lay it on me.
Something that presents itself to the senses but signifies something else to the mind. Essentially, he argued that a sign must be perceived by someone, and it has to point to something beyond its immediate appearance.
Okay, I see. It's not just the thing itself, it's what that thing makes us think of.
Exactly. This definition might seem simple, but
Yeah.
trust me, it has huge philosophical implications.
Yeah, I can see how that opens up a whole can of worms.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about subjectivity, right?
Sure.
And interpretation, the relationship between our senses and our minds. It's like,
You're spot on. And Augustine didn't stop there. He introduced this, crucial distinction between natural signs and given signs.
okay, I'm listening.
Natural signs are those inherent connections we observe in the world, like smoke signifying fire.
Got it.
They exist whether humans, are around to intend them or not. Given signs, on the other hand, are those we intentionally use to communicate, like words or gestures or symbols.
So natural signs are like those built-in indicators we find in nature, while given signs are more like tools we've crafted to share our thoughts
Right.
and our intentions.
Exactly. And among those given signs, Augustine kind of put words on a pedestal.
Interesting. I can see why.
He argued that anything we can express non-verbally can be put into words. But, the reverse isn't always true.
That makes sense.
Words, for him, they possessed this unique expressive power. They were capable of conveying these, nuances of thought and emotion that might be difficult to communicate through other means.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine having a nuanced philosophical debate using only smoke signals or interpretive dance.
Right.
But this brings up another question. If words have this special status for Augustine, how does he address those mental processes that are involved in language?
That's where his idea of the verba mentis comes into play, the mental word.
Okay, let's dig into that a little bit. What's the mental word all about?
Augustine argued that the truest form of a word isn't actually the sound we utter, but the mental concept that precedes it. This concept isn't just a passive reflection of the external world. It's
Yeah.
an active construction of the mind. It's actually shaping how we understand and represent reality.
Ah, so the sign isn't just out there in the world, it's also taking shape in our minds. This seems like a pretty radical departure from simply seeing signs as labels for things.
Absolutely. And this idea will have a profound impact on later thinkers, especially those who delve into the intricacies of logic and mental language. But before we jump ahead, let's turn our attention to another key figure who laid the groundwork for medieval semiotics, Boethius.
All right, let's bring Boethius into the picture. How does his work complement Augustine's and contribute to this, like, evolving understanding of signs?
While Boethius might not have explicitly used the term sign in the same way as Augustine, he was like a master of Aristotelian semantics, and Aristotle himself had referred to words as signs of mental concepts. Boethius, through his commentaries and translations, he acted as this bridge between Aristotle's ideas and, well, the burgeoning field of medieval semiotics.
So Boethius wasn't necessarily creating brand new theories, but playing a crucial role in transmitting and interpreting existing ones. It's like he was a scholarly DJ, remixing ancient wisdom for a new generation of thinkers.
I love that analogy. And through this remixing, he introduced some key concepts that will resonate throughout medieval semiotics. For example, he emphasized the conventional nature of language, how meaning is established through this act of imposition, basically, the naming of things. He also gave us this idea that to signify is to establish an understanding. It highlights the connection between signification and, well, cognition.
Okay, let's unpack that establish an understanding idea a bit. What exactly did Boethius mean by that? It sounds like he's moving beyond a simple correspondence theory of meaning where signs just mirror things in the world.
You're right to pick up on that. Boethius was pointing to the active role of the mind in, semiosis. When a sign signifies, it's not just pointing to something randomly, it's making that something intelligible to the mind. It's facilitating understanding, not just mirroring reality.
So there's this dynamic interplay between the sign, the thing it signifies, and the mind that's doing the interpreting. It's not just a passive reception of information, but an active process of making meaning.
Exactly. And Boethius delves even deeper into this process by exploring the relationship between things, mental concepts, spoken words, and written words. He introduces the idea of the ordo orandi, the order of speaking. This concept suggests a hierarchical sequence. Things exist first, then we form mental concepts of them, then we express those concepts with spoken words, and finally we represent those spoken words with written words.
It's like a chain of representation, with each element building on the one before it. But this hierarchy raises some interesting questions. Is Boethius suggesting that mental concepts are somehow more real or primary than the spoken or written words that represent them?
That's a great question, and one that will be fiercely debated by later thinkers. Boethius himself doesn't fully resolve this issue, but his ordo orandi will have a lasting impact on how medieval thinkers view, the flow of signification. It sparks discussions about the relationship between language, thought, and reality.
Okay, so we've got Augustine setting the stage with his broad definition of signs and his distinction between natural and given signs. Then we have Boethius bringing in Aristotelian ideas and this concept of the ordo orandi, which emphasizes the role of the mind in making meaning. It feels like the stage is set for some serious semiotic fireworks.
You could say that. We're about to enter the heart of the Middle Ages, where thinkers will take these foundational ideas and build these elaborate theories of signs. They'll explore their power and their limitations, their connection to language, logic, and even the nature of reality itself.
I am so ready for this medieval semiotic adventure.
Me too. Welcome back to our deep dive into medieval semiotics. As we saw in part 1, Augustine and Boethius laid the groundwork for a rich and complex understanding of signs, exploring their nature, their types, and their connection to human understanding.
Definitely, they got the semiotic ball rolling.
Exactly. Now we are going to fast forward a few centuries and plunge into the heart of the Middle Ages,
My favorite.
where these ideas take on a new life and begin to shape some of the most profound philosophical debates of the era.
Okay, I am so ready to dive into that medieval mind. What kind of developments are we talking here? What's waiting for us in this next chapter of our semiotic journey?
Well, one of the most exciting shifts we see is the emergence of mental concepts as signs themselves.
Interesting.
This might seem like a small step, but it has huge implications for how medieval thinkers approach logic, language, and even the nature of reality itself.
Okay, I am intrigued. Tell me more about this whole mental sign revolution. How did this idea even come about, and how did it transform the semiotic landscape?
It was a gradual process, building on those early seeds planted by Augustine and Boethius. Remember how Augustine introduced the idea of the verbum mentis, the mental word,
Yeah.
and how Boethius emphasized the role of mental concepts in signification?
Yeah.
Well, in the 12th and 13th centuries, thinkers began to explicitly recognize that if words are signs and words represent our thoughts, then those thoughts, those mental concepts, they must also be signs.
Ah, I see where they're going with this. So the sign wasn't just something out there in the world waiting to be perceived and interpreted. It was also something happening within the mind, shaping the very way we understand and represent reality. It's like the mind itself became a semiotic playground.
Precisely. And this shift had some really profound consequences. For one thing, it challenged the traditional definition of a sign. Remember how Augustine emphasized that sensory aspect of signs, how they present themselves to the senses?
Yes.
Well, if mental concepts are signs, then signs don't always have to be perceived through the senses. They can exist purely in the realm of thought.
Ah, that opens up a whole new dimension of signification, a kind of internal semiotics that operates within the mind itself. But how did this new understanding of signs impact the way medieval thinkers approached more traditional philosophical problems? Like, how did they apply this to the big questions they were already wrestling with?
It's fascinating to see how they weave this new perspective into their analyses. Take the problem of universals, for example.
Oh, good one.
This was a thorny issue that had plagued philosophers for centuries.
To be sure.
What is the nature of these universal concepts like humanity or justice? Do they exist as independent entities or are they just mental constructs?
Ah, yes, the age-old debate about the nature of universals. A classic philosophical conundrum that still sparks debate even today. So how do these medieval thinkers tackle this challenge with their newfound focus on mental signs?
Well, instead of getting bogged down in these abstract metaphysical debates, they shifted the focus to the way we use universal terms, how they signify, how they function in propositions. One figure who really embodies this approach is William of Ockham, our philosophical rebel, always ready to challenge the status quo.
Okay, Occam. Always a fascinating figure. So how does he shake things up in the realm of semiotics?
Oh, Occam was a true sign obsessive. He boldly declared logic deals exclusively with signs. Now, when he said signs, he was primarily talking about mental signs, those concepts swirling around in our minds. But he also acknowledged the role of spoken and written signs as secondary players in the game of logic.
So for Occam, logic wasn't about studying things in the world directly, but about understanding how we represent and manipulate those things through signs. It's like he's saying, forget about reality, let's focus on how we make sense of it.
You've got it. He even integrates the concept of supposition, which you'll appreciate as a philosopher, into his definition of a sign. Now, supposition is a technical term, but it basically refers to the way a term stands for something in a proposition. Occam recognized that for a sign to be logically useful, it has to be able to play a role in making assertions, in forming arguments.
So it's not just about a sign evoking a thought or an image in our minds. It's about that thought being able to fit into a logical framework, to participate in the process of reasoning.
Exactly. He's honing in on what later thinkers will call the propositional sign. It's as if he's saying, look, for a sign to be truly meaningful, it has to contribute to our ability to make claims about the world, to engage in logical discourse.
This is fascinating. So Occam places mental signs at the very heart of logic. But he doesn't stop there, does he? He uses this sign-centric approach to tackle other big philosophical problems as well.
He does. He was a master at reframing traditional philosophical questions through the lens of signs. Remember those universals we were talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Well, instead of asking, do universals exist, Occam asks, how do universal terms work as signs? He shifts the focus from being to meaning, from ontology to semantics.
Ah, so it's not about whether humanity or justice exist as independent entities. It's about how we use these terms, how they signify, how they function in our language and thought. Very clever.
He applies the same strategy to other philosophical puzzles, like categories and relations. He turns these metaphysical head-scratchers into questions about signification.
Wow.
And this is why some scholars describe his logic as being ruled by the concept of sign. It's not just that he talks about signs, it's that signs are the very tools he uses to analyze and dissect philosophical problems.
It's like signs become the skeleton key that unlocks the mysteries of philosophy for Occam. But he's not the only one embracing this sign-centric perspective, is he?
Not at all. He's part of a larger trend we see in 14th century thought, this movement towards a mentalization of the sign.
I like it.
Thinkers begin to emphasize the role of intentionality and signification, the way our minds actively shape the meaning of signs. It's a shift away from seeing signs as passive reflections of the world towards understanding them as mental constructs, as tools we use to make sense of our experiences.
So it's not just about what a sign is in some objective sense. It's about how our minds engage with it, how we imbue it with meaning. It's like the focus shifts from the sign itself to the semiotic dance between the sign, the mind, and the world.
Beautifully put. And this mentalist turn has significant implications for how these thinkers understand language. Remember Boethius's Ordo Orandi, that hierarchical sequence from things to concepts to spoken words to written words.
Things, concepts, spoken words, written words.
Well, with this new emphasis on the mental sign, things get rearranged.
Oh, how so?
The focus shifts to mental language, to what they call the words of the mind.
Interesting.
It's this internal language, this system of mental signs that drives everything else. Instead of spoken words expressing pre-existing thoughts, it's those mental signs that are doing the expressing. Spoken words become merely the outward manifestation of this deeper internal language.
So it's like the mind is speaking to itself using this internal language of signs, and spoken language is just the echo of this internal dialogue. That's a pretty radical departure from the way we usually think about the relationship between thought and language.
It is. And this mental language, for these 14th century thinkers, it wasn't tied to any specific spoken language.
Oh, wow.
It was conceived of as this universal system of thought, a kind of mental Esperanto that allows us to understand and use any language.
So mental language becomes this universal code, and logic, in a sense, becomes the study of how that code works. It's like trying to crack the enigma code of the mind. But this emphasis on mental language and mental signs must have raised some eyebrows, right? Not everyone was on board with this shift towards the subjective and the mental.
You're right. Not everyone embraced this mentalist turn with open arms. There were dissenting voices, often rooted in, theological concerns,
Okay.
who saw this focus on signs as a distraction, even a dangerous departure from a more direct and immediate connection with reality.
Okay, so we have a philosophical debate brewing. The signophiles versus the signoskeptics, right?
Yeah.
Those who embrace the power of signs versus those who fear their potential to obscure or distort reality.
Exactly. And this tension highlights the high stakes of these semiotic debates. It wasn't just about classifying signs or analyzing language. It was about grappling with fundamental questions about how we know anything at all.
Oh, for sure.
About the relationship between our minds and the world. About the very nature of truth and reality.
These are huge questions, the kind that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. It sounds like medieval semiotics wasn't just an academic exercise, but a vibrant and consequential exploration of the very foundations of human knowledge.
Precisely. And as we'll see in the next part of our deep dive, these debates don't end with the 14th century. They continue to evolve and transform as we move into the later Middle Ages, with thinkers pushing the boundaries of signification even further, exploring the potential of signs in ways that might surprise you.
Okay, I am on the edge of my seat. I can't wait to see where this semiotic adventure takes us next. Let's journey into the final chapter of our medieval exploration. Welcome back to our deep dive into the fascinating world of medieval semiotics. We've journeyed through centuries of thought, exploring how medieval thinkers grappled with the nature of signs, their relationship to language and thought, and their role in shaping our understanding of reality. We left off with this tension between those who embrace the power of signs and those who are wary of their potential to mislead. So what happens to these debates as we move beyond the 14th century? Do these medieval ideas fade into obscurity, or do they continue to shape the intellectual landscape?
It's a fascinating story of resilience and transformation. You see, while the rise of humanism in the 15th and 16th centuries brought a renewed focus on classical texts, those medieval ideas about signs didn't just vanish. They found new life in unexpected places, continuing to evolve and influence philosophical discussions for centuries to come.
Okay, I'm sensing a plot twist. Tell me more about this unexpected afterlife of medieval semiotics. Where do these ideas resurface, and how are they transformed in these new contexts?
One key location is the Iberian Peninsula, particularly Spain and Portugal. Universities there remain strongholds of scholastic thought, and figures like Domingo de Soto and Franciscus Toledo continued to engage with and develop medieval ideas about signs. They weren't just repeating what had come before, they were weaving these ideas into new tapestries of thought, integrating them with their own philosophical insights and responding to the changing intellectual currents of the time.
So it's like medieval semiotics found a safe haven in the Iberian Peninsula, a place where it could continue to flourish even as other intellectual trends were taking center stage in other parts of Europe.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is that from there, these scholastic ideas about signs get re-imported back into Western Europe in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, particularly in Catholic regions. It's like this intriguing intellectual loop with ideas crossing borders and influencing thinkers in unexpected ways.
Ah, so these medieval ideas weren't just preserved in amber. They were actively circulating, sparking new debates and inspiring new theoretical developments. But I'm curious, are they just being repeated verbatim, or are they undergoing transformations as they enter these new intellectual ecosystems?
Transformation is key here. Thinkers in the 17th century, drawing on both those scholastic traditions and their own philosophical innovations, begin to construct these incredibly sophisticated theories of signs. One group that really stands out in this regard is the Conimbricenses, a group of Jesuit philosophers associated with the University of Coimbra in Portugal.
Okay, I've heard whispers about these conembrescences, but they've always seemed a bit intimidating, like they're speaking a secret semiotic language only accessible to the initiated.
Right.
What makes their approach to signs so unique?
They were definitely heavy hitters in the world of semiotics. Their work is complex and nuanced, but it's also incredibly rewarding. They take those medieval building blocks, ideas from Augustine, Aquinas, and later scholastics, and they build this truly impressive theoretical edifice. They're systematizers. They create this comprehensive framework for understanding how signs function in all aspects of human experience, from logic and rhetoric to theology and even the natural sciences.
Wow, that's ambitious. It sounds like they're taking those medieval insights and amplifying them, expanding their scope and creating a more systematic and comprehensive theory of signs. But I'm curious, how do they specifically build on those medieval foundations? What are some of the key threads of continuity we see between medieval and early modern semiotics?
One key area of continuity is that emphasis on the mental sign that we've been discussing. Remember how late medieval thinkers like Occam really put the spotlight on mental concepts as the ultimate source of meaning? Well, the Conimbricenses pick up that thread and run with it. They argued that all external signs, whether spoken, written, or otherwise, ultimately derive their meaning from those internal acts of understanding, those mental signs that shape how we grasp the world.
So that mentalist turn in medieval semiotics doesn't fade away. It gets carried forward into the 17th century, becoming a cornerstone of these more elaborate theories of signs. It's like the mind remains the central stage where the drama of signification unfolds.
Exactly. And this focus on the mental has significant implications for how they view communication. They argue that communication isn't simply about transmitting information from one mind to another. It's about sharing those mental signs, those acts of understanding, through the use of external signs. It's about creating a shared world of meaning, a common ground where minds can meet and ideas can be exchanged.
So it's not just about encoding and decoding messages. It's about fostering understanding, about establishing a genuine connection between minds. It's a much richer and more nuanced view of communication.
Precisely. And their focus on the mental also shapes their understanding of the relationship between signs and the things they signify. They reject a purely referential view of meaning, where signs simply point to objects in the world like labels on a specimen jar. Instead, they emphasize the mediating role of concepts, those mental signs that shape how we perceive and understand reality.
So signs aren't just passive mirrors reflecting the world, they're active lenses that shape how we see and interpret reality. They color our perceptions and influence our understanding.
Exactly. And this idea of signs as lenses will become incredibly influential in later semiotic thought. We see echoes of it in figures like Immanuel Kant, who talks about our categories of understanding as shaping the way we experience the world. And we see it in 20th century thinkers like Ferdinand de Saussure and Jacques Derrida, who explore how language constructs meaning and shapes our perception of reality.
Okay, so those medieval ideas about signs, particularly that emphasis on the mental sign and the mediating role of concepts, really laid the groundwork for some major developments in the philosophy of language and semiotics. But what about that other idea we saw emerging in the late Middle Ages, that expanded notion of the sign, that anything could potentially function as a sign, not just words or symbols? Does that get picked up and developed by later thinkers?
Absolutely. That idea really takes root in 17th century thought. Thinkers like John Locke, for example, talk about how our ideas are formed through sensory experience and how those ideas can then become signs for other things. Anything that can spark an association, trigger a memory, or evoke a concept in our minds can potentially function as a sign.
So it's like that Lockean notion of the mind as a blank slate, being filled with ideas through experience, and those ideas then becoming the building blocks of language and thought. Each experience, each sensation, each encounter with the world has the potential to leave its mark on the mind, creating a new sign that can be woven into the tapestry of meaning.
Exactly. And this idea that the mind is actively constructing meaning through science becomes a central theme in Enlightenment thought. And it continues to influence how we think about language, knowledge, and even the nature of reality itself. We see it reflected in everything from cognitive science to literary theory to media studies.
Okay, so we've seen how those medieval semiotic seeds blossomed into some incredibly sophisticated and influential ideas. But I'm curious, do we see any direct links between medieval semiotics and that explosion in semiotic thought in the 20th century? Are there any thinkers who explicitly acknowledge that medieval influence?
There are. One figure who immediately comes to mind is Umberto Eco, the renowned Italian semiotician and novelist. He wrote extensively about medieval semiotics, and he saw those thinkers as true pioneers in the field. He even argued that many of the key concepts and debates in modern semiotics can be traced back to the Middle Ages. He was fascinated by how those thinkers explored the power of signs, their potential to both reveal and conceal, to illuminate and obfuscate.
So Eco was like a semiotic archaeologist, unearthing those medieval treasures and showing their relevance for contemporary thought. He saw that those medieval debates about signs and meaning weren't just historical curiosities, they were grappling with issues that are still relevant today.
Precisely. And he recognized that their work provides a rich and nuanced framework for understanding the complexities of semiosis, the process of signs making sense. They offer us tools for analyzing how signs work, how they shape our understanding of the world, and how they can be used to communicate, persuade, and even manipulate.
Okay, so it's not just about historical curiosity. These medieval ideas actually have something to offer us today, something that can help us understand our own sign-saturated world, a world where we're constantly bombarded with images, symbols, and messages vying for our attention.
Absolutely. Think about the ways in which those late medieval thinkers expanded the notion of the written sign, how they talked about any visual image or even sensory experience as potentially signifying. Doesn't that resonate with our own world of digital communication, where images, videos, even emojis have become integral parts of our language? They were grappling with the idea that meaning making wasn't confined to the realm of words, that it could seep into every nook and cranny of our sensory experience.
You're right. It's like those medieval thinkers were anticipating the multimedia world we live in today, where meaning is constantly being constructed and negotiated through a diverse array of signs. They were exploring the boundaries of signification, pushing the limits of what could count as a sign, and in doing so, they paved the way for a more expansive and fluid understanding of how meaning is created and shared.
Exactly. And their focus on the mental sign, on the active role of the mind in interpreting and creating meaning, is also incredibly relevant today. In a world of information overload where we're bombarded with signs from all directions, it's more important than ever to understand how our minds make sense of those signs, how we filter and interpret the constant stream of information. They remind us that we're not just passive recipients of meaning, we're active participants in the semiotic process, constantly shaping and reshaping the world of signs around us.
So medieval semiotics isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a vibrant and valuable resource for understanding our own semiotic landscape, for navigating the complexities of meaning in a world overflowing with signs. It's like those medieval thinkers are whispering across the centuries, offering us insights that can help us decipher the signs of our times and make sense of the ever-evolving language of human experience.
Beautifully put. And as we've seen, their ideas about signs and meaning have continued to resonate and evolve, shaping the course of intellectual history and offering us tools for understanding the very fabric of human communication and thought.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of medieval semiotics. We've explored their ideas, their debates, and their enduring legacy, and I hope you've come away with a newfound appreciation for these remarkable thinkers. Until next time, fellow philosopher, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the world of signs and meaning.